I grew up next door to a hospital, and a state hospital in West Virginia that you Virginians actually built until we succeeded from you. And my mother was really good about teaching us that the people in the hospital were just people. And of course, everybody else in town was afraid of them, but we learned not to be. And so it was real easy for me when I became a behavior analyst. And the first job out of graduate school, because I'd worked at that hospital also between undergraduate and graduate school. And I got hired on a Friday, and on a Monday, 12 students from the state hospital showed up. And my job was to get them ready to live in the community. And they ranged anywhere from 23 to 68. And the best that they could do was play bingo, some of them, with minimal assistance. And I was in an abandoned building that was a jail at one time. And next door to where my one classroom was a haunted house because it was around Halloween. So you can imagine how crazy it was. But over the years, I learned more from that group of people than probably anything else that I've ever learned from. Back then, I just don't want to say I'm old because it's just back then. We referred to people as profoundly retarded. We didn't talk about autism or anything. Everybody had a cognitive impairment is the way it was viewed. So I had the range of people to work with. And I learned very quickly that some of them were far easier to teach than others. And I had an opportunity to get some of them into an adult education program with typical adults. And so I had to start studying what would produce a better learner? Why did some of my students, so to speak, learn a lot easier than others? And that's how the model started. The only thing to add to it is after 9 years, I never intended on leaving there, but a friend of mine was a senator in California, and he talked me into going into public education with children. So I made the shift from there because he was, if I may say so, quite impressed with what was going on with our students. We ended up with, after that 12, we ended up with 45 students over 9 years and separate classrooms. And they built a building for us in the city. And we were right next door to senior citizens who loved interacting with our students. Wow. So it was quite an ordeal, but, Patrick insisted that I go to special ed, so I did. Okay. I actually, when I got hired, behavior analyst, you couldn't tell anybody you were a behavior analyst. And you certainly couldn't tell anybody that you believed in Skinner. I learned very quickly I had to not do that. But at the same time, nobody else wanted to work with the children that were causing problems in schools. Right. So that's how I originally got hired as a consultant. But given that I didn't quite, like I would never do a workshop in a sense, because there was no way I could bring someone to mastery of how to work with these kids. So I just kept going into one classroom after another and realized as a behavior analyst that I didn't know enough, and that I had to learn how to help people teach better, because that was the weakness in what they were doing is they didn't have a curriculum, they didn't have a course of study, all those things were missing. But fortunately, the teachers were thrilled to have me in most cases. Oh. In the process of those 9 years with the adults, I actually started reading Skinner. Unfortunately, when I went through graduate school, there were no Skinnerian books used. I hadn't read any of them, nothing. Except that one of my professors, and yet they said you had a degree in applied behavior analysis.
Right,
It's kind of weird. But one of my professors gave me Skinner's book on contingencies. And I just read that like crazy. And I don't think for many years I heard anybody even talk about contingencies at conferences.
Wow.
And then after contingencies, I got into science and human behavior, and that was tremendous. And then from there, I went into technology of teaching. And if you've not read it, get a hold of it. That's where the model is based, is out of technology of teaching. You know, I mean, I think I've put it in the unit. Skinner was real clear about teaching is the arrangement and rearrangement of contingencies.
Yep.
You know, and that's true. And that's how the whole model evolved, was based on contingencies that had evidence-based, obviously. You know, I didn't make any of this up. All I did was make it teacher-friendly. That I had to learn about teaching, I went, fortunately, when I was back in the school with the adults, I learned about language for learning, direct instruction, and I was schooled in that.
Okay. All
and
right.
Then my colleague, Dr. Dan Hirsch, was real good friends with Engelman and Carnine. Mm-hmm. So I got to visit Engelman and Carnine for several days. And I just fell in love with direct instruction, which you weren't supposed to if you were a behavior analyst, you know. With an assessment only, okay. You know, trying to figure out what was missing, you know, and what needed to be taught. And I had not read verbal behavior yet.
Okay.
But I was fortunate because one of the things that I read in Science and Human Behavior was, if you really want to learn how things function and you really want to understand your subject matter, you have to be exposed to the contingencies. So that's when I decided I could no longer be a consultant, you know.
Uh-huh.
Yet I took that position in Monterey just to start getting into the classrooms.
Sure.
So I was really rule governed when it came to Skinner's work, you know. I had to be in the classrooms.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I just had to be exposed to it all. And so over the years, I got to do action management. And I started calling myself a coach within a couple years.
Okay.
You know, it was like, no, I do coaching.
Yeah.
You know, I don't do consultation work. You
right.
can't hire me to go to meetings and things like that, except maybe, you know, under these circumstances. I became very strict about how I was allowed to work for people. I got to work with a cross-section of teachers and administrators that really taught me. There was no curriculum, you
mm-hmm.
know, to be had from the DI people, because I read Engelman's book on technology. I forget the name of it now, but you know what I'm talking about. And I learned about scoped and sequence curriculum.
Uh-huh.
And so I went from an assessment to a curriculum. And then I thought, oh gosh, how am I going to teach that? And that's how the units evolved. I realized it took me 8 years to develop those 36 lessons.
Wow.
You know, it's not like because you have to teach across the lessons. Skinner was really clear about the verbal operants. You don't teach just echoics and then try to teach interverbals or whatever. You teach across the verbal and the nonverbal operants.
Right.
That was the hard part, you know, was to get that to happen. I learned quickly that functional analyses were not the best tool. You really needed to do a content analysis. And you needed to also do a functional analysis of what would maintain the instructor's behavior.
Right.
Because I had to be in so many different classrooms.
Yeah, sure.
That it was necessary. So I got the big idea, so to speak, of formulate, deliver, and monitor for the instructors. And then, of course, the 7 repertoires evolved mainly in terms of their titles, from reading language, Skinner's book on language.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't think that speaker and listener was teacher friendly because
Right.
I had to talk about the verbal operants. So I couldn't do that. So I broke it down into teacher friendly repertoires and added right on the side of talker, I would say a echoic, but I never emphasized it. The only part about history that's missing, and I learned so much from her, is that darn Kathy Scott had decided she got from one of her colleagues in Pennsylvania, she got to see a kit. And before I knew it, she had decided she wanted to try it out in Pennsylvania. And I said, no, I don't even know you. I can't do this. Dr. Jerry Shook, who we unfortunately lost recently, convinced me that Kathy was really someone I could trust. So I went out to visit, and sure enough, I fell in love with her and said, okay, I'll try this. And then I basically trained she and another colleague, Donna Lefevre, over the internet. I would test them out on things and stuff. Fortunately, we had Skype, and so I was able to do it that way. And they were both behavior analysts, but they also had the speech therapy, or in Kathy's case, the occupational therapy. So they were used to teaching.